This podcast could be called Two Happy Guys Who Have Been Watching Football All Their Lives. He's been watching it for 70 years, me for 64. But it's the joy of football. And today we're talking the best atmospheres. We're talking how the culture and the history of the game cannot be touched. And we're looking back on the best homegrown 11 in the Premier League era.
Aguero!
The joy of football. Hello. This is episode 1 of the Joy of Football podcast, where we're celebrating the greatest addiction in the world. Martin Tyler, of course, the voice of the Premier League since its inception 3 decades or more ago. And before that, from the 1970s, a top football commentator. And me, Neil Barnett, well, you'll find out about me if you don't know already later on. Martin, though, we can still hear you on the airwaves.
Yeah, hopefully, because this is going around the world. Therefore, that's where my broadcasts are going. Working for the Premier League on, we call it the World Feed. Basically, every game in the Premier League and the EFL, I think, as well, and the Champions League and the FA Cup, they all have their domestic commentaries. But within those domestic commentaries, there's for the particular channel. For Sky, example, everything coming up on Sky Sports later is this, and we've got another game to come. So a world feed is needed without that, because if you're in Australia, you're not watching it on Sky Sports, you're watching it on whatever channel has the rights. So it's good work for the commentators. It keeps us in business, and of course, it's a massive audience. I've been doing it for a long time in conjunction with my work at Sky, and now full focus on that. And I've been to a lot of very good games, mostly Monday nights in the Premier League, where the goals have been flowing. Arsenal 6 at Sheffield United, West Ham 4-2 against Brentford, and of course I have to mention a Chelsea win on a Monday night against Newcastle, those quite recently. Great fun, and delighted. Still a privilege to do the job.
I spent over 30 years working inside Chelsea in the media. I was kind of the first supporter reporter, really, and people used to get very upset with me celebrating in the press box when people.
As you can see, blue is the colour, but I have to tell you that there was no consultation on this. The Murphy twins, who you might know, who came from Norwich City, and Jacob, who scored in that 3-2 game, and his twin brother Josh. Jacob told me once in a while ago now, that the twins, they would get up in the more separate bedrooms in their home in Norwich, and they go down for breakfast and they're wearing exactly the same stuff. It's not the case with us.
Yeah. I got banned from a press box, by the way, for celebrating. I think it was Everton. And Ken Bates was chairman at the time and told me to accept the ban, but if they held it out for the following season, he banned Howard Kendall from the dugout, so it never happened. Right.
What I can tell you finally on this is that I sat behind Neil on the famous Champions League night in Munich, where Chelsea became European champions. That greatest night in Chelsea's history, as I said at the time. Whether that's been overtaken since, that's for Neil to decide. But and I watched this supporter reporter in full action. It didn't quite get in the way of Gary Neville and myself, but it was lively.
Right, yes. I've also spent 14 years hosting a radio show in the USA on football, which Martin used to come on regularly, and I used to describe him as the greatest commentator in the world, and I think I'll stick with that. Martin, I want to start with atmosphere in our wonderful, wonderful game, and I want you to pick out just an electric atmosphere.
Well, the game that's always I'm very privileged to be referred to about is when Manchester City won the league, and Sergio Aguero, after Edin Dzeko, they scored the 2 goals in added time to win the title for City. And Mark Hughes was the manager of the opponents, of course, a former City manager. He was manager of Queen's Park Rangers, the opponents who were trying to stay up that day and did stay up. Everyone was a winner, as it turned out in the end, except the team that was trying to win the title, Manchester United, who had 2 hands, almost 1.5 hands on the trophy before those 2 goals. And I saw Mark the next night. It was the League Managers Association dinner in London by complete coincidence. The very next night, I bumped into him in the foyer, and he said, that we were talking about the game, he said it was the noisiest moment he had ever heard in a football ground when Aguero scored. And when you think he played for Manchester United, Bayern, Barcelona, international football, he had plenty of experience to draw on him with
and
that.
Chelsea.
Of course, Chelsea and Everton. And
Southampton.
Yes, he did play for a lot of clubs, didn't he? And managed a few clubs as well. So he'd been in a lot of football grounds, a lot of noisy moments, but he said that was the noisiest ever, and I would bow to his knowledge and say that probably was. I said Aguero, and I didn't speak for another, I believe someone timed it in 9 seconds. One of the reasons, I think silence for commentator is golden, to be honest, probably the best weapon a commentator has. But if I had said anything, it would have been drowned out, I'm sure, by that. So that was one moment. For general atmosphere in the grounds, I think it depends how the teams are doing, to be honest. But I was very taken. The Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is a real favourite of mine, and I did a game against the first time Arsenal went there after COVID, where the fans were in, and that's got great acoustics, wonderful atmosphere, and that was really hard to. I can remember saying to Gary Neville at half time, I think, I just called the names. You couldn't really think anything else. So that gets a special mention.
Very quickly, favourite Mark Hughes story. When he left Chelsea, he went to Southampton. He was about 34 and he came back for a social occasion. And I said, "How are you finding it, old man?" And he said, "I'm exactly the same weight as I was in my prime. Unfortunately, it's all gone off my face and onto my arse." So Mark Hughes at 34. I want to talk about this season in atmosphere, and I want to talk about Luton Town. It is just such a brilliant experience going there, and their supporters are fantastic. They're the funniest bunch of supporters in the country, in the main. One or two. We don't need the tragedy chants against Liverpool, but they are absolutely brilliant. And my favourite song this season by any set of supporters, when they lost to Manchester City 6-2 in the FA Cup, I was there. Haaland 5, De Bruyne the first 4 assists. Football is a joy, but one of the trends of this podcast will be my misery at the number of great footballers who are no longer at Chelsea. De Bruyne. But the Manchester City fans were singing, "We've won it all, we've won it all, we've won it all." They hadn't long won the Club World Cup. And the Luton fans straight away came back with, "You'll never sing that, you'll never sing that. Conference champions, you'll never sing that."
Well, I'm waiting as a Woking fan to sing that, and we've got close a few times in my 70 years of supporting. Obviously, the conference has only been in part of that time, but we can't sing that yet. But it's not going to happen this season either.
But the atmosphere is brilliant. Just them being in the Premier League is brilliant. And if you look back over the last couple of decades, often the best atmosphere is at small clubs who are making a go of it in the Premier League. I think back to Portsmouth, I think back to Stoke, Crystal Palace. They all had brilliant atmospheres for a while.
Forest, Brentford at the moment.
And the thing at Brentford, But when it tailed off because they got used to it is actually when those clubs went down. I want to pick up on Luton, though, because after a game there recently, I spoke to Andros Townsend about just that.
It is extraordinary, this stadium. I mean, Bournemouth's are small, but it's like a kind of...
it's brilliant.
Bournemouth's like a motel. This is like an old 2 up, 2 down from 100 years ago.
Yeah, these stadiums are the best, the old stadiums with character, where the fans are right on the pitch and they make it a hostile atmosphere. It's tough for any team to come, and we have to use that. If we're going to stay in the Premier League, we're going to have to use that to our advantage, and we have to take points.
Andros Townsend there talking to me at Kenilworth Road. And I would say the other thing about Luton is if you go there, the road parallel to the stadium, 1 block down or 2 blocks down, of course, is full of Asian supermarkets and restaurants, and you just get the best garlic naans there to take home for your curries at home. I love it. I love it. This podcast is going to be full of regular items such as Martin's letter from the Gantry, which we're coming on to in a moment, and other little things like the voice of passion. That'll be me, and the voice of reason.
That'll be me.
Yeah. He's 78. So
he's 70, by the way.
So let's not muck about, and let's move on to ta-da! Letter from the Gantry. Martin.
Thank you. Right, here we go.
Just explain before you start.
Well, it's an editorial piece, really, and it comes from the fact that when I was very small, I listened to BBC Radio, probably only a couple of stations then, and they had a Washington correspondent in the US called Alistair Cook, not to be confused with a left-handed opener for England with an outstanding cricket career. And Alistair Cook did a wonderful essay, obviously a verbal essay, of what was going on politically in the USA. I was entranced by the words, really. I can't match that quality of words, but I think the principle of it was to sum up a particular issue. And this is my letter from the Gantry today, to be discussed afterwards. It's not that long, so concentrate. There are many reasons to be proud of English football, but very high on my list is the football pyramid, the system of promotion relegation which extends deep into the structure of non-league football and offers the thrill of promotion as well as the sorrow of relegation at every level, from the massive to the minnows. No other nation has such a democratic system. It's not perfect, and there have been casualties down the years, but it should be treasured. I grew up a non-league fan. Woking is still my team. I played non-league football. I've coached at 6 non-league clubs and had a tiny role in the development of the likes of Shandon Baptiste, playing Premier League football nowadays with Brentford, and Jamal Lowe, who had a taste of that level of the Premier League in his time with Bournemouth and has acquired a happy knack of scoring for Swansea in those raucous South Wales derbies against Cardiff City, both clubs which incidentally had spells in the Premier League. Since its inception in 1992, 51 different clubs have featured in the Premier League. The current 20, of course. 19 are now in the Championship, 8 in League One, 3 in League Two, Wimbledon, Bradford City and Swindon, and 1 even outside the EFL National League, Oldham Athletic. At the moment, this is the point of the letter, at the moment the current top 20 are divided on whether they should continue to provide financial support for the EFL, and if so, even how can they reduce their previous commitments. I don't think it's a good look for the high and mighty, but their owners, to be fair to them, many of them not familiar with our pyramid, argue that business is business. I can relate to that. My own father, an independent shopkeeper, had to close down when a nationwide chain set up an outlet in the same shopping precinct. He couldn't compete with the attraction of branded goods and the cheaper prices which come with economy of scale. I suspect the number crunchers in football's elite world would like to see the current structure go under as well, so that millions of football followers would have fewer options, fewer grounds to go to. The already huge fan bases at the top would be further enlarged. More money for the rich. Part of me thinks that the handouts should be stopped. You might be surprised to hear that the extra money enables clubs to live beyond their natural means, that they should become much more self-sufficient, pay their own way if you like. But I believe deep down that would lead to a huge drop in standards. We have very high standards in our pyramid of football. Many clubs would survive, but their ability to pay players a current standard of wage would decrease. Many academies up and down the country would be unsustainable. The production line would slow. Full-time football outside the top 2 divisions would come to a halt. The whole football industry would take a significant downturn. It's a recipe for recession in the game. The request for money is not just a cry for help, it's a reminder that the big clubs do benefit from the pyramid. Not only do the lower ranks develop their own players, think of Exeter and their now Villa striker Ollie Watkins, they developed him. Charlton did that with the versatile Liverpool player Joe Gomez, as did Carlisle United for Everton's defender Jared Branthwaite, all, incidentally, members of the current England squad. The elite are able to educate their own outside the top flight through the loan system. All credit to Bristol Rovers for pointing out to the rich and famous what they are doing for Harvey Vale, who's on loan from Chelsea. I would be surprised if Chelsea aren't paying most, if not all, of his wages, but in return, he's had a season of highly competitive men's football, something that the Premier League clubs can't provide except with their first team. Vale has played over 40 times for Rovers this season. He will be sharper, stronger and wiser when he goes back to the bridge. And there are plenty of other examples. I'm sure you'll have your own thoughts on that. So To the accountants and the finance officers of our top 20, the message is simple. The chain must not be broken. Recognise the proper value of the benefits of experience and education that come from an alliance with the EFL. Do the deal and put the cheque in the post.
Yes. Brilliant ending. I mean, everything at the moment is just so geared to money and profit or projects. I mean, I've never heard anything as daft as a football project in my life. Football isn't about projects. Football's about winning trophies.
It's simply about winning matches, which can lead to winning trophies. And those in the dressing room, below stairs, if you like, know that. Some of them, obviously for the coaches, their jobs depend on that. What happens up above it seems a bit of a disconnect, really. And that's why we have the Chelsea, your Chelsea, I mean, Poch uses the word project almost in every press conference.
I know, it drives me out the wall. The project didn't exist when the owners bought Chelsea from Abramovich because their first signings were Koulibaly and Sterling and Cucurella, who weren't young players for the project. They were players to replace departed better players, and it hasn't quite worked out that way. But that's how it is. But it is a worry how many owners of Premier League clubs are getting to the point where they can change the rules with a 14 vote against the remaining 6. Change the rules in order to promote the business rather than to promote the sport. And of course, it kills me that in American sports, when you have a major final, that the trophy is handed over not to the players but to the owner. Because that is how they think over there. And it is different from how global football in the rest of the world thinks. Now, one of the most infuriating things that has happened in global football recently was in the African Cup of Nations, not this year, but 2 years ago, when Senegal won it for the first time. And Infantino, the chairman of FIFA, handed it over to the Senegal captain, Kalidou Koulibaly, and before he lifted it, he took him up into the stands to the president of Senegal and tried to get him to lift it with him. And Koulibaly had the class to say, "Piss off, chairman, president of FIFA," and he just shook his hand, gave him a few words, and then regally took it down to his team and lifted it with his team. And Koulibaly is an absolute saint for doing that. Now, Infantino at the moment, I see, has had his base salary increased by 33% in the last year to $4.67 million, is his total pay package, because he got a huge bonus as well. A bonus of $1.87 million on top of his basic pay of $2.78 million. And everything is just going this way. Money. And you're right. Because in this country, going to football is the greatest thing in the world. And as we saw recently with the Saudi Pro League, non-league football in England is getting more crowds, bigger crowds than some of the teams in the Saudi Pro League. There are only 12 teams in the Saudi Pro League. And by the way, everybody, Saudi Arabia has a population of 40 million. It's not a small country. There's plenty of people to go to football, but they only go to the 4 big clubs. So that's how it is. Let's move on from this.
I think just one point on it, Neil, is that our football has been there almost since the beginning of football, and it's grown from beneath. And I do think that trying to implant it onto a country is very, very difficult. I've been very closely involved with Australia covering a lot of World Cups for them, and they're still having the issue of trying to make the A-League a successful enterprise, both in terms of getting young people to play soccer, as they would call it that. Not the channel I work for, by the way. They very, very much didn't call it soccer, but the kids have to pay for coaching, which is a recipe which they don't have to do for Aussie rules.
No, it's like
rugby
that in the
league or
States.
rugby union.
It's a business.
Yes, so,
choose all the big kids.
But I liken it to, and this is a very delicate subject for me to raise on this podcast. I liken it to hair that grows naturally, or the hair transplant that comes back on when a lot of people are doing that these days, including some broadcasters, I believe. I know, in fact. And it's very hard to make the non-natural stuff grow. And you can't, I don't think you can say, well, we're going to turn. China is a great example. There was a past political regime that decided that football was going to make the Chinese sport so much better. And it became compulsory in schools, and people didn't take it that way. You can't be ordered to do these things. And so for the Saudis, I sympathise with the difficulties of getting the league to a level. I go back to the old NASL before the MLS in the United States, where I personally saw on trips to the States, Bobby Moore playing, Pele playing, Beckenbauer playing, George Best playing, Giorgio Chinaglia playing.
My mate Giorgio Chinaglia, what a legend.
And it's got to a certain level. It gets you so far, but it's organic in our country. It's grown naturally.
And to be fair, in MLS, it's begun to grow naturally.
Yeah.
They get better crowds now than they do in a lot of
But the one thing
European
I really, you can put me straight on this. A few years ago, because I did discuss it with maybe on your show for Sirius XM, that there was a cup competition in which all the clubs, like our FA Cup, started in all the different states, and you became the cup winner in your state, and moved on, and it became a wonderful. Now that's the sort of thing that is contrary to the way that big business runs sport in the USA, but totally in keeping with what we're talking about here and my love for the pyramid. That could be a better pyramid even than ours if they did that. There could be so many clubs, and it would be such a. And there was one story that I got involved in, and forgive me, I can't quite call up the details, but where a club had like a non-league team and got to the third round of the FA Cup, which Woking once did quite recently, by the way, and that was being greeted with the kind of excitement that it would happen here.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether that's kicked on the fact that
the US Open Cup is
that what it's called?
Yeah, it's the US Open Cup. It is. It's not treated seriously enough, but it is a really good competition. Yeah. I just want to say one thing about Australia. Chelsea played a friendly in Sydney back in 2015 at the biggest ground in Sydney. That'd be the Sydney Cricket Ground, but it
was the Sydney Football Stadium. There's a lot, because obviously
and it had a capacity of about 80,000, something like that, and it was slightly out of the city. But your tickets for the game worked on the train from the centre of Sydney out to the stadium, so you didn't have to get different train travel tickets. They were part of the deal, and I remember thinking when they went for the World Cup, I think they went for the 2022 World Cup, I'm not sure, but it may have been the 2026 one, but when they went for the World Cup, I thought, my goodness, that is the kind of thing that FIFA should be looking at, something that supports the spectators.
There was a political error which stopped that happening, as it turned out. There was a great opportunity. I haven't visited very often, but working with Australians on all these competitions for years now, since 1990, the love, for those who really love it, deserve it.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure the country, and this is an argument really, I mean, the USA had the World Cup in 1994, now they've got a share of it again.
Oh, ridiculous.
Because of, I guess, big finance. But I'm not
Money
sure
talks.
that Australia have quite got that. And they've had the Women's World Cup and other competitions. But I think to justify it totally, the problem is that people look at sports as competitors with each other. And why cannot Aussie rules, football, people, rugby union, rugby league, the big sports, they're frightened. They're frightened of what football can do. And it's crazy. Why be frightened of it? There's room for all these sports together to coexist, to work in partnership, as we see with NFL playing in a Premier League ground. And it really infuriates me that we maybe kept particularly our game, because it is the world game. So if you involved in, say, rugby league in Australia, then you might think, well, if they come in, if we give them too much, then we were only rugby league. And I can understand that argument, but it's a false one.
Yeah, grow the economy. Right, let's move on to Voice of Passion.
Voice of Passion.
Well, I'm staying on the same money theme as we've been talking about and trying to protect what we love so much. And there are just too many games. Now, the latest thing that's happened is that FIFA have announced, instead of having the Under-17s World Cup biannually, they're going to have it annually. And that doesn't just mean the tournament, it means all the qualifications and everything else. And like the Senior World Cup, it's going to be 48 countries as opposed to 32. They're going to cram it in. So that is going to be for the next 5 years in Qatar. Oh yes, it's going back to Qatar. No, there's no corruption there, of course not. I don't believe there is for a second. Really, I don't. And the women's Under-17s World Cup will go annually from 2025, and for the first 5 years it will be in Morocco. So it's not being shared around. This is a new policy. Does it get votes for president of FIFA? No, of course it doesn't. It doesn't. But what it does do is take players out of their clubs, and it just demands more travel, more games, and everything is more games. The 48-country World Cup in the seniors is just... The whole point of the World Cup is that it's elite. And you can't be elite if you have more than the elite countries in it. Friendlies. International friendlies. Why have we got international friendlies when we've got the Nations League? Take what's happened recently. England playing Brazil in a friendly. I can live with that. I can live with that. It's from a different confederation. England playing Belgium in a friendly. What is the point when you have got the UEFA Nations League? Oh, I know. Ka-ching! That's the only point. We've got the Club World Cup expanded to I can't even, is it 32 teams? And that's going to be in the States in summer of 2025. Why? Oh, ka-ching! Everything is about the money. And the one thing that FIFPro, the Players' Union globally, and the Players' Union in individual countries, that they have not done, they haven't stood up to this proliferation of games which will bring down the general quality of football. And when the Club World Cup was announced, the new format for the Club World Cup was announced, Thomas Tuchel was still manager at Chelsea, and he fumed. I've not been consulted. Football coaches have not been consulted. They will kill the quality of the game with too much football. Oh, the Champions League. Can we just finish with the Champions League, the extended Champions League?
It sounds like you finished with it.
I'll tell you. Well, my club, yeah. Well,
no, I didn't mean
days
that.
of glory.
I meant you personally. But no disrespect to Chelsea.
But the first time Chelsea were in the Champions League, 1999-2000, people forget there were two group stages, not one group stage. You went through a group stage of 4. You then went to a group of 3. And then you went to the quarterfinals. So to win the Champions League, you had to play 17 games. When they went into the current format, which is the round of 16, and then and then down to the final, to win it, you play 13 games. And the reason they reduced it was too many. It was killing everyone. Now you have to play 10 games from next season, 10 games before Christmas. And it's not even home and away.
Right. Can I bring some reason to this? The under-17 point to start with, I'm not so sure that that is a bad thing, because I don't think that football played at club level it's more educational than it is result based. And if you're going to be a successful professional footballer, you have to learn about winning. So if you go into an international tournament, then you're representing your country, and you have a real chance of being result related to it, being relevant to the way you go about your business. A lot of coaches in the under 17 teams at club level, it's all about education. It's all about getting one or two into the first team. It's not about creating a winning mentality, but the top players have that winning mentality. So I don't see that's too much of a problem. I don't think the club games are so meaningful and so stressful that these tournaments can't exist.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because as many people have seen on TikTok recently, that Harry Redknapp clip that went all around saying the problem with youth football in England now is that there are no ex-players coaching. They're all people who have never played the game. And that is affecting it more than ever.
That's happened for the last 25, 30 years. One or two famous names in football used to be school teachers before they went into football, and they've had a big influence. I'm not going to name them on this podcast. Had a big influence on the type of person running. But with safeguarding and the way we all look at the world in I think a better way, in developing young people, not just churning them out for football, and where we've all come across ex-players who had sad stories to tell about the way that they've been treated as young players, or to the high-profile abuse cases. So I think that's brought some goodness to it, and also some ability from the players to communicate as well. I think the educational side, there's not a young footballer really now that you can't interview, because they're doing interviews on the website. They're more rounded human beings. But I think they need to play more competitive football, and this is a way to doing it. So I'm going to disagree with you on that. On the other issue, there is no argument. Until football from within stands up to all these extra fixtures, then they will proliferate. Infantino's mandate is to make money for FIFA. That's his job. So we shouldn't be surprised by it. He came from UEFA, who make lots of money, and his remit going to FIFA, whether that's personally driven or what he was told when he got the job, he has to try and increase the revenue stream to make FIFA work and be more profitable. I don't resent that. I think that's a business decision. But in doing so, what he's using to get there, and with these extra matches for elite players in particular, and we all know the injury stats at the moment. Pretty much every commentary I do starts with missing today are, and that's the demands of particularly the way the game is played in this country, which is high octane stuff, first whistle to on the 108th minute when we finish. And so, but the players have to be brave. The PFA have to be brave. Fifth Pro have to be brave and say, we can't do this. We cannot do it. Now, the game is saying, well, we've got lots more subs now, so you're only going to play for 60 minutes. Particularly if you're a forward, you're not going to play 90 minutes. And therefore, you will have a longer life, because the minutes you play will be spread out a bit more, because you're not playing 90 minutes or 108 minutes in every game. So it's up to those within football, the medical side, the playing side, and the Thomas Tuchels of this world, to do something about it. Everyone's up in arms at Ben White because he's refused to go and play for England. And yet he may have very good views about looking after his own body, about...
We'll come on to that.
Okay. But there is some stirrings in there, if you like. And Ben Foster, the former England goalkeeper, has spoken out recently about saying he turned down a couple of England trips because he knew he wasn't going to play. So maybe Ben White's going because he doesn't think he's going to play. Or maybe he's not going thinking, I'm going to play 180 minutes here that perhaps won't matter too much in my international future. I want to be ready for Arsenal v Man City, which comes straight afterwards. So maybe there's a little stirring from within the game, but it's no good just people coming out and saying it. Even we're not going to have any influence on it, but it has to be looked at from a serious point of view and saying enough is enough. And the fans who pay huge sums to go and see these games, they expect to see the top players. And that's not really happening in the Premier League. At most clubs, there is a treatment table thing on the internet you can find which lists the injuries. And I regularly look at that for my work. And it is, averages 6, 7, 8, maybe as much as 8 different players in each club in the Premier League at any one time. So we have to look after those that are giving us so much entertainment.
After Ole Gunnar Solskjaer got sacked by Manchester United, I think their next game was at Chelsea, and my grandson went. It was his first chance to see Cristiano Ronaldo, who was then back at Manchester United, and he got dropped for the game. And I spoke to him afterwards, not Cristiano, my grandson, and I said, "What did you think?" And he goes, "But he didn't play." And I said, "Well, he came on." He said, "Yeah, but when he came on, he never touched the ball." And I said, "Well, that's probably why he didn't get selected to play in the first place."
Is it Michael Carrick, was it, the manager?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Listen, we're sticking with this theme. Money. One of the most stupid things in football at the moment is that because of the way the PSR, the profit and sustainability regulations have been set up, if a club sells its homegrown players, you get to keep, or you get to write off all that money as profit. Whereas if you sell a player you've bought, it's the transfer fee and the amortization that's taken place that is taken into account, and you're not able to use all that money as profit in your finances. So in order to counter this, we are going to select the all-time Premier League homegrown 11. So these are players who have to have done well at the clubs in which they've come through. And we have talked a little bit about this, as you can imagine, in advance.
Yeah, this is all time in Neil's time in this study here to research. I'm going to put my hand on the heart saying I've watched a lot of these players, but he's categorised them. So if we've missed anybody out,
I mean, you have to play in the youth team to be homegrown. And the extraordinary thing is, in the Premier League time, we could only come up with one goalkeeper who had had a really good career with his homegrown club, and that was Tottenham's Ian Walker.
Well, goalkeepers are crucial. I mean, you look at the goalkeepers that have been brought in, Peter Schmeichel, I think it was just before the start of the Premier League, actually, and Alisson, for example, Edison, and they've made massive impacts. You can scout the world to find the best ones, but there are lots and lots of young goalkeepers about. My involvement in coaching non-league football, we've had goalkeepers from Wolves on loan, young players. Currently, the club I'm at, we've got one on loan from Watford, and this is high level stuff, but they're not getting games. And it's a terrible position to go into. I mean, I'm very good friends with Mervyn Day, who you have to go back in time, but who got into the West Ham team when he was a teenager, won the FA Cup with West Ham as a teenager.
And played in the European Cup Winners' Cup final.
It did, and basically had a good career. But because we were mates, and I saw the difficulties he had to go wrong green with his manager, who then went on to make, or maybe it was John Lyle, who said that you're going to be the manager of this goalkeeper at this club for 10 years. You know, it was a terrible amount of pressure to put on a young goalkeeper. And the youngsters are, it's difficult. The young one from the Premier League last season, Ilan Meslier, he looked at times a boy. And it doesn't help that he still looks like a boy, even though he's in his early 20s and from mid-20s now. But, it's a really stressful area to throw a youngster in. Very young players, some managers won't play young players at all. They're frightened of the risk of the marginal gains, if you like, whatever, or marginal losses with young players who might make a mistake that cost you a game. Goalkeepers, obviously, are in there. I have that particular storm, so very few. It's almost an anomaly from what we're trying to do to find somebody who's been thrown in as a youngster. They have been thrown in maybe at clubs that they didn't make their name at. David James, of course, was at Watford and then really blossomed.
Well, that's clubs, the thing, yeah. Well, let's go to defence, right back. Now, there have been some right backs who have had long careers who have come through the youth teams. of whom I think the standouts, Gary Neville, your mate, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Reece James, all Champions League winners.
Yeah. Have I got to pick one?
Yeah.
I have to pick Gary Neville, otherwise my life won't be worth living.
What's he like?
He's wonderful. He is exactly. There's no act. He's a force of nature. He's got a great sense of right and wrong. He's had a very, very good upbringing. It's a little story, but England played in China in 1996, and the press were allowed to go with the players to the Great Wall of China for a photo opportunity. And there was a great old photographer called Monty Fresco.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't go on this. I was there, but I was prepping for the match, I guess. I didn't go up on the wall. But Monty came back to the hotel where we were staying in and said, "What do you know about the Neville brothers?" And I went, "Well, they're young, promising players. They're both here." He said, "They carried my photography kit back to the coach for me afterwards." He said, "I'm amazed. They were so polite, so nice." And I thought that was a nice way for me to. I love finding out about the personalities of the players. They're not robots, are they? So, and Gary's lived up to those standards. It's a small story, but
in 2009, I went up to Old Trafford for the third round of the FA Youth Cup between Manchester United and Chelsea. United took a 2-goal lead and Chelsea won 3-2. Gal Kakuta. I'll tell you, United had up front, I think, Danny Welbeck. And the Italian guy, Federico
Makeda.
Yeah. They were the forwards. And I went up, I was doing it with Chelsea TV, and MUTV did a live broadcast, and they had their commentator, who was probably Steve Bauer, now Match of the Day, famous BBC, and the co-commentator was the England right back, Gary Neville, who I could not imagine another footballer in 2009 in the rich Premier League saying, "I want to go and do the youth team co-commentary." But he was doing his apprenticeship then. It's
amazing. Around that time, I did a pretend commentary with him in a studio in Manchester with a view to him going to a World Cup, the World Cup in South Africa for an American channel. And he didn't get the job because of the Manchester accent. And they preferred what we call the Queen's English, I guess. And I'm
now called the King's English.
Yes. Yeah, of course it should be called the King's English.
Rah!
And it was a great loss for them. I mean, they had very good guys went out and did it, so don't get me wrong. But they didn't recognise the potential in Gary, and obviously great credit to Sky Sports. They've done that, allowed him to go off and let him have his tilting management, welcomed him back, and yeah, he massively cares about football. He massively cares about the people that he works with in football, and it's been I'm not making this up for a podcast, I promise you. It's been a real pleasure to get to know him, and proud to call him a friend.
He was very good defensively. He wasn't great attacking. Trent Alexander-Arnold is great attacking, but he's not so good defensively. So Reece James is clearly the best all-rounder, but just never fit. So that's a bit of a problem, isn't it? I'll put Reece in and you can have Gary on the bench. Centre-backs.
I'm the assistant manager here, by the way. This is like my non-league days where I get told what the team is and I go with it, of course. Neil, I'd go with your team.
I've got a load of shortlist for centre-backs. Tony Adams in the first 10 years.
Well, it's John Terry, so let's forget about
Sol Campbell, John Terry, Jamie Carragher, Ledley King, who I thought was an unbelievably underrated player, Lewis Dunk.
Yeah.
We cannot forget Lewis Dunk, who is the heart and soul of Brighton and Hove Albion, and has played in all 4 divisions, hasn't he? I think Lewis Dunk, as they've come up.
Ben White certainly has. I'm not sure about Lewis Dunk, but he might have done, yeah. I'm going to speak for Jamie Carragher, of course, as my ex-colleague. who I first met a Youth Cup final between Liverpool and West Ham. Might have been 96. And I went to watch training. That's what you have to do. There's not much footage. Nowadays, probably go to any club site and you can see the youth team matches in full for the whole season. But then you couldn't. So they were training somewhere out of London on the east side, Essex, some hotel in Essex, maybe Brentwood or somewhere like that. And they were training on the day before the game. So I went to watch it. And there weren't too many players from that team that actually came through, although they won it. Michael Owen played, this was the first leg. Michael Owen was playing maybe with the first team or some other commitment. So he didn't play in the first game and played in the second game and clinched the trophy for Liverpool. But the training session was finished and I was going around the and I got a lot of help from the coaches. That's been the whole of my life, really. I'm grateful to people in football who made my life a lot easier, my identification of players a lot easier. Anyway, this lad came up to me and started chattering away in my ear about what was going to happen in the game and why was I there and everything. And very inquisitive. And it was Jamie Carragher. I think was playing in midfield then. And after that, he scored his first goal on his first start, I think, for Liverpool, first Premier League goal against Aston Villa at Anfield, where I was commentating on that as well. And occasionally in the last sort of 7 or 8 years when we were colleagues, he'd send me the goal for him, obviously to remember the thrill of scoring and the fact that I was the one who correctly identified the scorer. So he's been a part of my football life for a long time, and no one does more prep, I promise you. I think I do a lot of work, but Jamie does a massive amount. So we're not really evaluating him as a broadcaster here, although he's made a real niche for himself and is very much in demand. As a player, he gave everything. He made an amazing transition from being an Everton fan to a Liverpool legend, which came up occasionally in commentaries between the Merseyside derbies. And I think he must have been a coach's dream. You knew you were going to get the total treatment
Fergie loved
every
him,
game.
didn't he? Fergie loved him. Yeah.
And he could play obviously at right back, centre back. He played a holding midfield player, played left back, and I think probably the amount of games he played for Liverpool. I know it wasn't the years of the 80s when they were winning everything all the time, but that made it more impressive for me. That there are so many changes, managers, players, and he was a constant theme through it for the beginning of his career to the end of it. So I'm a great believer in being successful is one thing, sustaining it is the hardest thing, and he certainly sustained it as an individual player and as a team man.
Obviously, John Terry is captain of this homegrown team, although Tony Adams might have something to say about that, because Tony Adams was a great player and captain. But I want to just give an example of why John Terry is the greatest captain the Premier League's seen. By the way, we've got 2 young producers that people can't see here who are both Manchester United supporters. So I just want to tell them that Roy Keane wasn't the best captain.
Are you a bit put out when they asked you who John Terry was?
No, I'm going to introduce him to them. And they will be buried in my garden. But back in 2008, if you remember, no, it wasn't 2008. It was, I think it was the season after, 2009, when Frank Lampard's mum died. 2009, and Chelsea. It was prolonged. She had pneumonia, and she got better, and then she got worse again, and she died in the middle of the Champions League semi-final, and middle between the 2 legs, and I was down at the training ground with the TV crew to do an interview with Michael Ballack. Now, that was the Chelsea team with tons of international captains. Didier Drogba, captain of Ivory Coast. Ballack was captain of Germany. And Shevchenko was captain of Ukraine. And Czech had captained Czech Republic on occasions. It was just and Lampard himself had captained England on occasions. It was a team full of captains. And I went down with the TV crew to interview Michael Ballack. all set up in advance. And he came out from training in a suit. He was one of the first to come out. And he said, sorry, can't do it today. And you get used to that at training grounds. You've set it up. Sorry, can't do it. And I said, okay, any reason? And he said, yeah. And he pointed to two coaches. He said, John Terry said we've all got to go to Frank Lampard's mum's funeral. He pulled rank over the rest of the international captain. Didn't pull rank. He was the captain, leader, legend. And he was able to carry that responsibility and say, we are a team, we all go. And everyone went.
I think that's the reason why Chelsea could change managers so regularly, because the dressing room didn't change. And John Terry and Frank Lampard and others, Ashley Cole, they were strong. They put down the standards for the other players, and so who was manager wasn't irrelevant, but it could be changed without any lessening of what the standards were coming from the players.
I agree, totally.
Yeah.
Which brings us on to left back, and a bit like goalkeeper, we've only got one on our shortlist because Ashley Cole at Arsenal was one of the invincibles, and he was, of course, rushed into the first team, Ashley Cole. People tend to forget this because the Brazilian who preceded him, whose name was
Silvinho?
Silvinho. Didn't he lose his work permit or something?
Was it Silvinho?
Yeah. And Ashley had to be rushed into the first team. And
he'd been on loan at Crystal Palace, hadn't he? Where he'd made a bit of a splash there.
But this was 2000, I think. And in 2002, it was England's left back in the World Cup and one of the best left backs in the World Cup.
And 100 caps plus to come, yeah. Yeah, and he's still involved in football, which is great. JT is as well. And I think it's the ones that have their heart as well as their heads in it that deserve a special accolade here, because we've mentioned Ben White in another context, but if it's just a job for Ben, which he's entitled to be, and plenty of players have come to work, and David Batty is one that comes to mind, who's, I don't know whether he's been seen at football, maybe doing him a disservice, but he certainly was happy to go off and explore the rest of his life, because it's very demanding. People forget the sacrifices. We talk about the money, and for some it is, of course, life-changing money, never have to work again and all that stuff, but not for that many. And you give up so much of what so many youngsters watching this, the social life, friendship, being childhood friends, where you can't go out, you can't spend time, you've got to eat the right things, you've got to be on the best behaviour now because of you can't let your hair down on a night out because it'll be all over the tabloid press. So I'm full of admiration for those who keep going. And the ones that you do keep seeing around, they've always loved the game, absolutely loved the game. I don't think you can stay in it because there is responsibility on being a big ex-player as well. All the ones that do, the pundits, you mentioned Gary and Jamie, but you think of Rio Ferdinand and people like that as well, who probably should be on your list.
Well, Rio and Joe Cole and Carrick and Frank Lampard, all West Ham, but they were all good at West Ham, but they were all great elsewhere, weren't they? And so I finished up not putting any of them on it, but it's probably a massive disservice to West Ham and what they achieved. But bad luck, boys. Right, I'm going into central midfield.
I think you do a job there, yeah.
Paul Scholes, Steven Gerrard, Nicky Butt, Phil Foden, and interestingly, the great thing about the Premier League for so many years was it could attract youngsters from all over the world. It can't now because of the new rules that are brought in. Cesc Fabregas.
Yes, Cesc Fabregas counts as a homegrown player, really. And quite a few do from other backgrounds because of the Premier League regulations, where if you've come through from a certain age, even though we always identify them by their nationality, that they do count as the same as the English guys. But there's a good selection in there, isn't there, really? Who have you gone for?
Well, I mean, can Scholes and Gerrard play together? Old questions.
I thought it was Gerrard and Lampard.
Well, it was,
together,
but
yeah.
it's the same. It's the same problem, wasn't it? They're
Poor
both
old
bombing forward.
Scholesy stuck on the left. Yes, he wasn't very happy. With it. Great player. Paul Scholes, a wonderful player.
Well, I mean, listen. I think Foden's got as much talent as any of them. Nicky Butt was England's best player at a World Cup, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think, was it Pelé who came out and said that Nicky Butt was the player that he liked most in the England squad? Some compliment that.
Was that 2002, 2006? One of the two, I can't remember. I'd probably have to go on careers with Scholes and Gerrard, but hey ho. Listen, we could go with 3 and play 4-3-3. Scholes, Gerrard, and Butt probably.
You decide the formation. You're the manager.
Okay,
I'm just
right. Let's go with wingers. Let's go with wide players. I'm going to lump them all together because some of them played on either side. But you've got obviously more right-sided. David Beckham, Matt Le Tissier, Ray Parlour. I'm throwing in Leon Osman, who now does a lot of football commentary and punditry. But, I mean, he's an Everton legend. He's one of those players who just spent all his career in the Premier League and was an absolute bona fide Premier League player without necessarily being a world-class player.
He came through the youth team. I did the Youth Cup final that he played in. And it's, as I mentioned my story with Jamie Carragher, it's always been quite a bond. It's a great boon for a commentator to meet these players when they're so young. And I mentioned Jacob Murphy earlier, who I met with the England under-21 team. And there's more access. And in fact, at times we get asked to help the young players with their media training and how they should go about talking to people like you, who might ask them an abrasive question in the mix zone afterwards. I mean, Ryan Giggs, I saw his very first game, his debut. He came on very early as a sub before the Premier League for Manchester United, home to Everton. And then, of course, ends up being, one of the most appearances.
Well, left wing, I've got Ryan Giggs, Steve McManaman, Wilfried Zaha. I don't think we should overlook what he did. I know he went away to Manchester United and then came back to Crystal Palace. But you'd have to say, along with Ian Wright and a couple from that late 80s, early 90s team, and even going back to the 70s, Steve Kemmer, who went on to play for Chelsea. Probably Palace's greatest player, Wilfried Zaha.
Yeah, and in teams that were regularly struggling. So, and of course, the stat, which I can't give you an updated version of it, but the games that they won with him, which was relatively high, and the games that they couldn't win without him. So I think that's always, in a team game, we always try to emphasise it. It's great. Why I love football so much is you are as strong as your weakest link, and it is everybody pulling together. And
Beckham, Le Tissier, Parlour, who are we going for?
I'm a big fan of Matt Le Tissier. He gave me some of the most great moments. I did David Beckham's goal from the halfway line at Wimbledon, but those early Premier League years down at the Dell, where I did my very first commentary, actually, so it's got nostalgic for me. And Matt just out of nothing. I mean, it was just audacious to even think about shooting and scoring from the positions he found himself in. Very much an individual on the field and very much an individual off it as well, which he's bows to nobody, and he's great company. He's always got a view on things, some of them controversial, but many of them very sensible. So,
and just to put the other side of it, many of them bloody ludicrous. Matt Le Tissier gets in, then left wing, Giggs, McManaman, Zaha.
I think for the sheer number of games that Ryan played, and there's this whole story about he should have played for England. Well, he was born in Wales to Welsh parents. He played for England schools because he went to school in England, which allows you to play for you're an English schoolboy. But so he was never in a position to play for England. He didn't play. I think that's probably the one thing that maybe he regrets now, but certainly I think Wales football suffered a little bit under managerial pressure. He didn't play as often for Wales. He could have made Gareth Bale work really hard for those records.
The 1999 FA Cup semi-final goal against Arsenal will live in memories forever for people who saw it.
Patrick Vieira gave the ball away, which didn't happen that often. And it was the last ever goal in an FA Cup semi-final replay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were always, we knew it was the last FA Cup semi-final replay. And of course it was the winning goal on the night where Arsene Wenger went absolutely bonkers with disappointment, furious.
Not that he couldn't do it on other nights.
No, but he recognised
on a regular basis.
He recognised that Arsenal had missed it. Obviously, there was a sending off and the penalty. Bergkamp was saved, and he recognised he had a golden opportunity not only to get into the FA Cup final, but put Manchester United down. And the rivalry is so intense that when you see Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola hugging each other and everything, and of course Mikel Arteta, who's in the mix with Arsenal, very good friends with Pep Guardiola, you forget what it was like between Arsene and Sir Alex. So, and that was part of it was combustible, and that was part of the real edginess of doing those games.
Right. The forwards include some people who actually could play in those wide positions or even in central midfield. I've got a short list of Harry Kane, Tottenham, Paul Merson, Arsenal, Robbie Fowler, Michael Owen, Liverpool, Emil Heskey at Leicester, we shouldn't forget, and Marcus Rashford, Manchester United. Who are we going for?
I think you can toss a coin for it, and none of those would be out of place in the team, and any one of those not in the team would be feeling aggrieved, I think. I thought Michael Owen at his best was a really exciting player to commentate on, but probably Michael would be the first to admit that Robbie Fowler just had the edge when it came to finishing. That hat-trick in that time against Arsenal, I was lucky enough to do that. Funny guy, Robbie, as well. Very successful man off the field as well. Maybe not in football management so much, but
property,
bright as a button. And they all. I think you have to have. I mean, we talked about Steve McMahon earlier. A really intelligent person going to Real Madrid, as Michael did, as well as David Beckham did, able to to fit in straight away. And so you're judging them as footballers. I don't want to pass judgment. I've been lucky enough to get to know them all, and I do feel sometimes that makes it very hard to make these decisions. But you can pick anyone you like, and I'll feel sorry for the ones you haven't.
Harry Kane.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, even though he's won a golden boot somewhere along the line, he's not really done it in the big tournaments. I think when he won the golden boot, he had 5 penalties and 1 out for goal or something.
I can't believe I'm hearing this.
I do think...
The only thing I've ever argued about Harry Kane was actually Jimmy Greaves scored 2 more goals for Spurs, and Spurs wouldn't let me acknowledge that because he scored them in what was then the Charity Shield. And at every other club, they count those goals. Ian Wright, you mentioned earlier, his Arsenal goals include. In fact, we retrospectively gave the late Cliff Bastin another goal. Arsenal didn't, I didn't, but because we said that was it, Wright's going to have these goals. So Bastin scored in the Charity Shield in the 1930s. He was Arsenal's record scorer. So he got another goal after a long time after he'd passed. So it was. That was a big issue with Harry Kane. That's the only issue. So I had to commentate on the moment where he broke the record according to Spurs, and deeply inside he didn't break the record according to me.
Yeah.
Well, what did I matter really? But quite a few other of the commentators felt the same way. But we went along with it, and lucky enough to have that goal, and all the celebrations on the day was. It's just a fantastic goal.
I was there. It was against Manchester City. I was there, and. The reason I've sort of started with a slight downer on him is because I'm going to pick him as the best homegrown, because somehow he can do everything. Yet he doesn't look as though he can do everything. No, he can run in behind, even though it's a trudge. He has got the most fantastic football skills when he receives the ball anywhere on the pitch. He's totally comfortable. He hardly ever gives the ball away. He's 2-footed. He is a wonderful, wonderful finisher. I mean, you talk about Robbie Fowler. I think Harry Kane is as good a finisher as Robbie Fowler
probably
was.
With greater size. He's probably better in the air as well.
Yeah.
And the goals that... Yeah, he gets into positions where you go, well, maybe it would be iffy for anybody else to score, but Harry's going to score. And what he's doing in Germany, he's just ripping up the league and breaking all the records. Yeah. And for somebody who had a slow start, he went to Leyton Orient on loan, didn't he? Didn't get in Leicester's team when he was on loan there. Millwall, was he there as well? Not really pulling up any trees. And of course, that link that's always haunted him, that he wore an Arsenal shirt as a schoolboy player, under 8s or something like that. But definitely one of their own for the Tottenham fans, and yeah, he'd walk into any team. Picked by better people than us.
I interviewed Harry Kane once after a Chelsea-Tottenham game, and I managed to get him, just the two of us, so nobody else was interfering. And it had not long been the Super Bowl in the States, and he is a famous New England Patriots supporter, and he was talking about the Super Bowl, and he went to the after game party, celebration party, and I don't know him, but I got this interview with him, and I was desperate as a Chelsea supporter to say, and tell me, Harry, how did you find it being at a trophy celebrating party? Did you learn anything? But I didn't, because I thought you might.
I should hope you did as well.
Knock me out.
But,
okay.
It's not just American football. He got a private jet after playing for Spurs at Aston Villa to the Masters Golf, Augusta, and was back in time. I think they started, it was a Saturday evening game. He was there for the Sunday, the final day of the Masters. He played the course on the Monday. Sky generously, they get sort of 6 passes for covering the game, and gave them one to Harry. And he played, and he got back on the plane and came back and was at training on Tuesday morning.
Brilliant. Okay, so our team is, with a lot of bias, I admit, in goal, Ian Walker, right back, Gary Neville or Reece James, centre backs, John Terry and Jamie Carragher, because we know them. Left back, Ashley Cole. Midfield, I'm going to go with a 3-man midfield of Gerrard, Butt and Scholes. Nicky Butt, can you believe that? On the flanks, Matt Le Tissier on the right. Controversial. Ryan Giggs on the left and Harry Kane up front. Not bad side.
You pick the team, boss. I'll put the cones out.
Right, so on to our final component, and we're calling this one 3 of the best. And I should follow that with something, shouldn't I?
He's made them pay, I believe. But I think we should say they earned their pay. Yeah. The 3 of the best. We have 3 each, actually.
A game that I never played, but my kids did. Right. I want you to give me a young player.
Well, I'm not being very original here, because he's been recognised recently by Gareth Southgate, no less, with the England squad. Kobbie Mainoo of Manchester United, who has emerged on the scene this season in difficult circumstances. By United standards, we know that all is not absolutely right yet, and they're working hard to try and get it right, and he's going to be somebody who I think can help them get it right. Midfield player of talent, ambition, and the joy of youth, if you like, the fearlessness of youth. A local hero from Stockport, that's Phil Foden territory as well, isn't it? But also with Ghanaian background, and maybe one of the reasons that he was called up into the England squad was because Ghana, perhaps sensing an opportunity to have a talent that play for them through decades. You would think at this age he's got so much ahead of him. But really impressive on the ball, not looking out of place, not looking nervous. It could be the latest version of the class of 92, really. That's a pretty high compliment to give him. So, yeah, it's always difficult to talk about young players because you don't want them to get ahead of themselves, but he looks level-headed. He looks as though he's got all the tools of the trade, and I wish him well.
I'm going to go for my young player with Liverpool's Gerald Quansah, who has come in and done so well in big games in place of Konate next to Van Dijk. But the reason I'm going for him is to go back on the theme of this first podcast and the whole money football thing that we're faced with. And I'm going to read you the statement by the Bristol Rovers president. You brought up Bristol Rovers earlier on, Wael Al-Qadi. This was his statement over this whole issue of whether the Premier League should be giving money towards the pyramid of
subsidizing,
football.
Distribution of wealth, the official term is.
Taxing them. And people ought to be taxed, especially the rich. Right. We at Bristol Rovers gave Gerald Quansah and Elliot Anderson, Scotland international, of course, men's football, and both are now established top-flight players with their respective clubs, Liverpool and Newcastle. Surely their combined market value one day will be much more than the extra amount the Premier League are haggling over. This season we took Harvey Vale, who you talked about, on loan from Chelsea, and he has played the most amount of minutes that any Chelsea loanee so far this season has played, over 2,400 minutes for Bristol Rovers. We are developing Harvey and building up his physicality to a level where his body can withstand playing Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday fixtures at a consistent level and in a very competitive league, something which under-21s football will never come close to providing. Absolutely true. Each club in the EFL has many loanees playing, learning and developing before returning as assets to their parent clubs. Maybe we should discuss future development fees for our loan players when they are eventually sold by their parent clubs. I'm sure Mr. Burley at Chelsea will have plans to sell Harvey for £40+ million after we developed his game for them. The Premier League need the EFL, and the quicker they realise and pay for the added value we provide to them, the better. They need to act decisively and quickly before it becomes too late for some clubs. Strong words, and Quansah is someone who I'm sure will back that up, because he has gone into Liverpool at a level that he couldn't have gone in if he hadn't experienced those loan games with Bristol Rovers. Top player. He looks a top player. Okay, give me your old player.
Well, this is a story that I think might have come out in some areas. I didn't read it anywhere. When Erling Haaland scored 5 at Luton for Manchester City. And you have to be of my age to remember it actually happening, but it's something that should have been, I think, bounced off. In 1961, Dennis Law, the great Dennis Law, scored 6 goals for Manchester City at Luton.
Manchester City.
Manchester City, yeah. Because before he went to Manchester United, his first spell at Manchester City. And the game was abandoned with 20 minutes to go, so the goals didn't count. And it was nowadays there's a huge amount made of it, but then it was just part and parcel of the back page football as it was in those days, rather than all over the newspapers these days. And they had to play it again, and this time Luton won 3-1. The game was completed. Dennis did score the one Manchester City goal, but I can imagine to score 6. And none of them count in your records. And Dennis has got some great scoring records, of course, but those are the 6 that got away. And I just thought, because it was the very same, you've talked about the Luton ground. Yeah. It's the very same ground in the very same place with only 1 or 2 upgrades, of course. But for that to happen, I just thought had I been lucky enough to commentate on the day, I would have raised it. But I can't blame the younger commentators for not knowing. But I remember it actually happening, and I'm sure Dennis does.
Who would you most liken to Dennis Law now?
Ooh, that's a difficult one.
Jota?
That's a good point, yeah.
Alvarez?
But Jota didn't score a header for Wolves, I don't think, but scored a good few for Liverpool. And he does sometimes, you're looking at a crowded penalty area and you hardly see Jota, and then the ball's in the back of the net and Jota's wheeling away having headed it in. Yeah, I'd go along with that. I think that's a very good comparison.
My old player is the king of Stamford Bridge, Peter Osgood. And the reason I'm bringing him up isn't a Chelsea thing so much, but it is a Chelsea story. In the days of football managers as opposed to football head coaches, you could look in the long term. You could plan. You can't do that now, because if you don't win the next game, you could be out of a job next week. And in 1965, Tommy Docherty, then Chelsea manager, who had the England centre-forward Barry Bridges in the team, announced that 18-year-old Peter Osgood was going to play the next 10 games because he believed that Osgood, given that opportunity, would become the great player. He played the next 10 games, and then, of course, he became one of the all-time greats of Chelsea, the king of Stamford Bridge. Fast forward to the 2023-24 season, and 70 million euros down, 30 million add-ons if it works out. Mykhailo Mudryk had played for nearly a year, 8-9 months for Chelsea, and hadn't scored a goal. He scored his first goal at Fulham back towards the end of 2023. And he'd had a little run of games in the team. A longer run of games than he'd had at any stage since he'd come to the club. And I put it to Maurizio Pochettino afterwards, thinking back to Peter Osgood, about why he'd had that run of games. This is what I said in the press conference. Did you have it in mind to give Mudryk a run of games when you started this run? I think that was his 5th game in a row.
No, I think he played because he deserved, and because he showed on the training session that he deserved to be there, because he was really focused, and performance on training provide us the confidence to put on the pitch and play. Because normally it's the player need to show us that we can trust on them.
Maurizio Pochettino there, and these clips I bring you are brought in liaison with SiriusXM FC. The
cry of Chelsea was Osgood is good, wasn't it? And was it Barry Bridges, who was playing for England as a striker,
right,
got shifted out
to the right wing,
yeah.
and Bert Murray got dropped. Yeah. So Maurizio Pochettino didn't make the decision to play Mudryk for 5 games and then got a new level out of him. It was simply on training, session after session, in between game after game, decision for that game. And that, to me, is how head coaches think now. And to me, it makes it much harder for young people to get into the team, or for people to grow in confidence for the team. And of course, back in the days of Osgood, there were no substitutes. Within his first year of coming into football, the one substitute was introduced for the first time, but then you had to be injured in order to be taken off for him to be used. Of course, everybody faked it.
That was rumbled after a year or so.
But the fact is, it was all about, if you started the game, you were finishing the game. And you knew that, and it was a different mindset. Now you have to prove yourself in 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and it's much, much harder. And to get a run of games, out of the question, because there aren't any managers anymore, unless you go to Pep, unless you go to Jurgen, unless you go... Increasingly, you would say Mikel Arteta, even with his director of football, Edu, seems to have that role at Arsenal, that authority. But elsewhere, if you want to give someone 10 games in order to kickstart their career, you can't, because after the 3rd one, you get sacked if you haven't won. And I just think it's a great shame.
It's interesting, just on a side issue of that, Pep Guardiola probably makes less substitutions than any other manager.
And has a smaller squad.
Yeah, and wants to work with that, which I think most managers would like to do that, but obviously there's a lot of pressure to give players minutes, because most of the people in Premier League squads, certainly at the elite level, at the very top level, are international players and they expect to be playing. But he rides roughshod over that, and there have been games where he hasn't made a substitution at all. Yeah, and big games. So so that's the
right,
old
and
player.
we're going to finish 3 of the best, and he made them pay, with player.
Yeah, I want to go back to Ben White, but to use Ben White as an example of Arsenal's attitude, the excellence of their football speaks for itself. But I did the commentary. Ben White scored the 6th of the 6 goals, 5 different scorers and an own goal, emphasising the wide range of options that Arsenal have to win matches. And this
is at Sheffield United.
The 6-0 at Sheffield United, on the Monday night. And Chris Wilder, who's a very experienced manager and a top bloke, he obviously was disappointed with the way his team went, and that the other bad results. It was almost the worst that could possibly happen in those circumstances. The whole football world watching a standalone game on a Monday night. But in looking at the deficiencies of his own team, he praised up the the attitude of Arsenal was, I think something along the lines of, I couldn't remember in a long football career, a team attacking a game with such intensity. You remember Saka hit the bar in the first minute and they were 3 up in no time at all. And in the midst of sort of putting the game to bed almost in the first quarter of an hour, David Raya, the goalkeeper, was chasing the ball behind the goal to get a restart going instead of maybe they think, oh, well, we're in front now, we'll just slow it down a little bit. But they came and came and came again. And I think that was, at the time, it was put down as a mismatch between the two sides. But in truth, what Arsenal did was exceptional. And as I say, Ben White got in on the act. He'd been in the news for all sorts of other reasons, but he was one of the 5 scorers. I think he scored in all 4 divisions now of the Premier League, counted as one of the Football League, of course, plus the 3 in the Football League. So all 4 divisions, it's a great effort to do. Not many people play in all 4 divisions, be it so young as him. But they were exceptional, Arsenal, and that I think is a factor to put into their title-winning credentials, that they can do that. Come up with a ruthlessness is not a word that's been associated with Arsenal's football. Maybe even back in the day where Alex Ferguson, Manchester United had more of a ruthless streak to them, although Arsene Wenger's Arsenal pushed them all the way and, of course, outstripped them in many a race for a piece of silverware. So, yeah, it's Ben White for me. Who have you got?
I'm going with Newcastle United's Miguel Almiron, because recently he played his 200th game for Newcastle. Now, he is someone who was signed from MLS in the United States. And all this talk of Saudi Pro League because of the money that they were splashing around over the last 18 months or so. But Almiron is somebody who has made his name playing club soccer in the USA and has been signed by Newcastle, brought over here. He was a popular player with the St James's Park crowd right from the beginning because of his attitude, his work rate, his enthusiasm, and his smile.
Oh, yeah.
His smile was the most important thing. He's never done an English language interview, and considering he's played in England now for 3, 4, 5 years,
and
he
the
played in the
USA.
States before that, I don't know how he's got away with it. I have asked. They keep saying no, he doesn't do it. But of course, he started scoring goals then after 2 or 3 years, and now he's become a really important member of the Newcastle team. But there's another player playing in the Premier League who made his name in MLS who's not American, and that, of course, is Jack Harrison, who actually went over there on a scholarship and got himself into the New York City side of David Villa, of Andrea Pirlo and Frank Lampard, and kind of, well, not so much Villa, but the other two, he outstripped them. He was a really good player.
He was, as they say, in the City organisation, wasn't he?
Yeah,
because of
and he went back to Manchester City after that, didn't make it there, went to Leeds and stayed in the Premier League when Leeds went down, and is now at Everton. The MLS is producing players of some interest to the Premier League, and Miguel Almiron is the absolute first and foremost of those. In the summer of 2023, I went to Chelsea versus Newcastle at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta.
You mean last summer?
Yeah. And it was Atlanta.
That's a complicated way of saying last summer.
It was Atlanta United in their first season, where in the MLS it's called a new franchise. In their first season, that they actually won the MLS, and Almiron was a huge part of that. The game between Chelsea and Newcastle finished 1-1. Almiron got Newcastle's equaliser. And I'm telling you, we started this podcast with you talking about Mark Hughes saying he had never heard such noise at Manchester City. I have never heard such noise, and I've been to a lot of games in the USA. I have never heard such noise in a USA stadium as when Miguel Almiron got the goal, because the Atlanta public were out to hail what they would consider one of their own. It was absolutely fantastic. Almiron is a huge player, both stateside and over here in the Premier League, and very interesting to see will other players now be brought who aren't American over? Good space to watch. This has been the joy of football. We've had joy bringing it to you.
Yeah, it's an experiment for us, to be honest with you. We want to be honest with you. If you like it, there'll be ways you can let us know. If you don't like it, let us know as well, because then I can use the spare time to do something else. But I'm really happy to be alongside Neil. We've known each other a long time. He's a proper journalist as well. You think we joke about the Chelsea involvement. He's worked for Chelsea. He's entitled to talk them up. But we love football. The joy of football was, we both agreed on the title because we've had so much joy. To say we're giving you joy is probably a bit of an overstatement, but that's what we're trying to do with our memories, some of them from a long time ago, which might confuse a few people, but might bring back some nostalgic memories for some of our older viewers. And also, obviously, we're involved in football as it is played in the Premier League and beyond today, in my case, in the National League South as well. So let us know. If you'd like some more, we'd be happy to do it.
Details of how to contact us coming up. Meanwhile, from Martin and me,
Goodbye.
ta-ra. Okay, if you want to contact us, this is the email address. The Joys of Football
at gmail.com. Shall I do that? We do it between us.
No, right, start again.
Yeah.
Okay, if you want to contact us, it's very simple. Email thejoysoffootball@gmail.com. In this case, for the email, joy is plural because we're hoping there's going to be a lot of you. The joys of email @gmail.com.
The joys of email. You said the joys of email.
The joys of football. Start again.
The joys of email at football.com.
That's the spin-off podcast, the joys of email. Right.
I hope this is still running.
Yeah, well, actually, we could use that, couldn't we? Yeah.
Well, from the top.
Should we? Let's leave it. I hope this is still running.
Well, you do the first bit and I'll do the second.
Okay, if you want to contact us, the email address is thejoysoffootball@gmail.com. Joys, plural, because, hey, we want to hear from a lot of you. Thejoysoffootball@gmail.com.
Well done.
That was take 2.
Yeah, put it out like that. Seriously. Seriously.